This is the yearly tradition where I dedicate January of every year to catching as many things as possible from the previous year because often not too many movies come out in January. It is the perfect opportunity to catch and rewatch before making the best of the year list every year. So this is everything that I caught from 2020 since the last quarantine watch list video. I started off with Time, a documentary about a love story took over the course of 2 decades that talks about systemic racism. I liked how the film looked, the cinematography is extremely pretty, but when it comes to the storytelling and the message they're trying to get across, to be honest, I don't think it did a good job when you're looking at the full picture here. The Prom will have its audience. This is just ain't for me. There's not a single musical or dance number that was memorable to me. The lyrics are often cringeworthy and the characters seem like they're ripped straight from a fantasy book. The Bloodhound has a way of framing its subjects and lingering their shots to invoke a quite unpleasant feeling from the audience. Narratively, it can seem a bit thin, but I think there's something interesting here to look for. Summerland is definitely a feel-good movie, one of very few from the year that actually stuck out to me. It's very charming with how they present the characters and their relationship. The editing is at times chaotic, but really smooth. Some of the plotting can be forced, but I had a good time with this one. Pieces of a Woman gripped me right away with its opening sequence. Vanessa Kirby gave one of the best performances of the year, and the film doesn't diverge itself to anything that isn't important, taking a very serious and often taboo subject and making it accessible to the audience by showing you the emotional trauma and journey a person goes through is extremely effective, I thought. The 40-year-old version was also a very charming film, directed, written, produced, and starred Rada Blank, who plays a playwright who wants to make a change to her lifestyle by exploring the world of underground hip-hop in New York City. It doesn't take itself too seriously to a point it loses any enjoyment. I find myself smiling and laughing as it went, with some deadpan jokes and incredible pauses in its dialogue. The 40-year-old version I thought was also a lot of fun. Totally Under Control gives you a closer look at just what exactly went wrong in the beginning of 2020 when a very bad virus broke out. The documentarians mostly contrast how the situation was handled in the United States versus how it was handled in South Korea. It gives you some good insight and information. I think it's important. Spontaneous was alright. I love how absurd it is and how it conveys a simple theme through a very easy and comedic way. Despite what's going on screen, everything actually worked out pretty well at the end. Dick Johnson is Dead is a little documentary on Netflix that is very personal to the documentarian, who's staging several ways of which her father would die in his last few years. It really feels like you're eavesdropping on someone's life, as when everything is said and done, Dick Johnson became someone who lived. The Climb was a bit of a mixed bag for me. I think the filmmaking is definitely there, with long takes that bring you to the various settings and have you experience the characters' lives and conflict in real time, while putting you through a toxic friendship that spanned over years. It's a very raw look at the subject, and I would recommend seeing it for yourself. La Llorona is a Spanish horror film that doesn't really follow genre tropes. It's really not about La Llorona at all. It has some hints of it, but the film is really focused on the recent history and political turmoil of Guatemala, and a lot of what you see is really just a visualization of it, or how the filmmakers chose to present the case. Unpregnant ran to me more like a PSA than an art piece. It has its audience and I respect that. The execution and approach just isn't quite up my alley. I think there are way better ways to deal with subjects like this, but for what it's worth, you can have fun with it. Why Lie felt like an entire movie of setup for a story that would eventually come in the sequel, but I really dug it. I do want to know more about the characters. The filmmakers kept it subtle, but I ended up wanting more. The ending is very abrupt. It doesn't feel like it ended yet, but I think the message is conveyed extremely effectively through that. Ginger's Tale is a Russian animated film and is definitely for kids. You can see everything miles away. It has a wholesome message. It got some fun musical numbers, but it's quite formulaic and repetitive. There's gonna be things that you don't give a shit about, but I guess it's alright. I rewatched I'm Your Woman because I thought it was a smart script upon my first viewing. With this rewatch, I do acknowledge and realize there are a few holes in its plotting, especially the dialogue. It respects the audience a lot. It trusts you a lot that you would figure shit out yourself, but there are moments that I felt they kind of went a little bit overboard. A lot of people absolutely loved Bacurau, but I guess this one just isn't for me personally either. For the majority of the runtime, I was confused. I wasn't sure what the filmmakers were aiming for, and usually I just think it's a first viewing issue where it gets better with subsequent viewings, but with Bacurau, I don't think there's much for me to grasp, actually. Synchronic has a killer concept and a terrific cast. I think the script could have been polished a little bit more, maybe. We cut back and forth quite a lot between the juicy part of the story and the subplot that you barely care about. I was just imagining what this film would have been like if it was a semi-bottle thriller with Anthony Mackie. The assistant rewatch went better than I thought. I made a video about this. I still do very much admire this film. I gave Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always a rewatch because it's a film that's been lingering in my head ever since I saw it. I didn't quite like it the first time watching it because I kind of wrote it off as another political propaganda-esque movie, but the filmmaking is incredible. The performances, the directing, and its restraint. It's a very smart piece of filmmaking. One Night in Miami is definitely my cup of tea, a semi-bottle adapted from a play that stars a killer cast that might just be the best ensemble of the year. I do think the pacing could have been just a little bit tighter, but I want to give it a rewatch when I have the time, and I made a video about this. That's how good it is by the time this video comes out, that is. News of the World is almost like you get what you expect type of thing. While I like the story and some of the cinematography here a lot, I'm just not so sure if Western is the genre for Paul Greengrass. The energy that seems to seep through from a lot of his previous work is almost invisible here. Promising Young Woman has a quite original take on a subject that has been explored several times in the past. Carey Mulligan is very good. Bo Burnham is brilliantly cast, to be honest. The blaring soundtrack is so electrifying, but the morals and values the film imposes, I'm really not sure about it yet. I would enjoy Rose Island either a lot more or a lot less if I had known that it was actually a true story beforehand, because it is so ridiculous. It's almost too unself-aware, but I think having a little bit of time to think about it, this kind of felt like a missed opportunity for me. Kajillionaire rewatch was a lot of fun. There are just so many things in here that I wonder how the filmmakers even come up with in the first place. These are very eye-catching visual ideas, and the theme of love that's binding everything together is quite emotional to me. I'm Thinking of Ending Things rewatch gave me a lot more time and space to digest what was left off of me when I walked out the first time. I do like the whole thing more, but the overall execution and approach on things, I just don't think it worked as well on screen as it probably should have been, especially on paper. I love some of the costumes and especially the production design, but the editing to me is a bit much. Mank rewatch made me understand and like the film more. There's a good chunk in the middle portion of the film where I was bored watching the first time, but then I found myself completely lost in it during the second time. The editing is complex and fast moving. I think it's one of the best edited film of the year. I don't know what future rewatches entails, but for now I think I really should have loved it, but I didn't enough, and I think there are a lot of things that might make my experience with it even better down the road, especially with rewatches. I'll just have to wait and see. I noticed a lot more things now that I have rewatched First Cow. Part of it is because I was kind of zoning out the first time watching it. The level of patience in his directing, how the beats and rhythm are controlled, and how subtle the details are. First Cow is technically riveting. I love the cinematography, the sound editing, and pretty much everything at display here. I gave The Dark and the Wicked a 4 the first time. This rewatch kind of wiped away a lot of that initial magic I felt. I guess it's just that kind of movie that doesn't age too well. There are still things in it that I really enjoy though. Dry Voice rewatch went surprisingly well. I appreciate it a lot more than my first viewing, and I definitely caught a lot more from it. And also, yeah, timeline wise, I rewatched One Night in Miami, so yeah. To the Star rewatch kind of lost a lot of magic that I felt during my first viewing, but still incredible cinematography, and when it shines, it definitely does. I also had a lot of fun with the Possessor rewatch. I was quite unsure about this rewatch, but after I walked out, this one is solid. 14's picture looks very flat. Either the acting or the directing made the film extremely offbeat. We don't so much to see anything too explosive happening on screen, but the film manages to almost surprise you with every scene because that's kind of how life works. In 14, I thought it captured something that a lot of people are going to connect with. I think there's something interesting here. The Empty Man was the movie that I just didn't want to touch, only based on the awful title, plus the poster definitely suggests a horror movie. The two things combined lower my anticipation pretty much to the bottom. And I gotta say, this wasn't terrible. There are a lot of editorial and directorial choices that are interesting, and that's the best thing I can say about it. It's better than a lot of these horror films that have been coming out, but at the end of the day, The Empty Man faltered by trying to be too many things at once, and the overlong runtime did not help the case too much either. Sightless could have been an amazing thriller using a concept that I myself am incredibly intrigued by, but it's just such a missed opportunity to play with the audience's perception. Having a blind main character can lead to so many possibilities when it comes to creativity, but the film ran exactly like any other cheap thrillers, focusing on things that isn't interesting and unforgivably predictable. I also watched The Living Room Stand-Up by Kevin Hart. It was a chill time. The Vast of Night rewatch was a lot of fun as well. And the last thing I watched is The Speedcubers, which is a documentary on Netflix following the two legends in the community, Max Park and Felix Zendex. As a person who had his little moments with Rubik's Cube coming up, this one definitely hit closer to home than I was expecting. I do think there's enough material and heart there for it to be at least twice as long when it comes to the runtime, but while it lasted, I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching the final catch-up of 2020. My best of the year list should come out next week, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, I'll see you there. Bye.